Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you after what did we take 2 weeks off?
It's been a hiatus, man.
It
We've never
has.
done that before, I don't
That
think.
a couple weeks ago, I was out sick. Everybody in the house
Yeah.
had COVID, and we kind of quarantined and tried to stay away from everybody. And then the next week, you weren't feeling well, and there was other things going on, and so we're
Yeah, I
back.
don't know what it was. And that which brings us to today because we prepared these several weeks ago
Yeah.
when these stories were just beginning to appear. So it's not that they're stale, but we intended to do this a couple of weeks ago. So
Yeah. And
not stale,
there's
but
some newer stories that we definitely want to talk about. This past week was
right.
my word, quite a week.
A lot has happened in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, so we'll be catching up with some of that over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, we're gonna talk today about one of our frequent topics, and we're gonna talk a little bit about parenting.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially gentle parenting.
Yeah.
Gentle parenting appeared a few years ago. It's not that old, but
No.
it appeared a couple of years ago. The idea is that, as the name implies, we have to be careful with these little darlings. They're delicate creatures, and we should be talking to them and moving them gradually um, toward adulthood. And there was um, a family that I know sent me a book, and it's called The Emotional Life of the Toddler, and written by a woman who's, my cuddly little baby
Yeah.
suddenly became this little terrorist at, 20 months of age. So children are warm and cuddly, but they also have this other side. And
Yeah. You know, I was talking to a couple years ago, and if they, I don't know if they listen to the podcast, but if they hear this, to me, it's fascinating because not necessarily that they're gentle parents, but as an example, they have this preteen who wanted more cupcakes,
they
wanted
know more.
a cupcake, and the mom said, "No, you can't have any more cupcakes." And he took she was holding the plate, and he flipped the plate, and and a lot of times what gentle and I think about that because this parent didn't respond in this way, but what a gentle parent would be, oh, honey, calm down, it'll be all right, and takes that very gentle, passive almost approach that working to try to understand where the kid's coming from, and all that's great. However, there's got to be some consequences to some of that
Well, you
behavior.
know, that's right. The gentle parent would say, I understand your feelings. You must be really upset about this. However, there's a broken plate and a cupcake mess on the floor that
Right.
somebody has to clean now, right?
And it
And,
ain't me.
and it's not gonna, I didn't put it there,
No.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
And so what's really interesting is the article that we're kind of pulling some of this from, and there's a link in the show notes, but is they're talking about how gentle parenting, Gen Z especially, may be shifting away from gentle parenting towards the idea of FAFO.
Yeah, I had never heard that before.
You never heard that.
Me, I just learned what BOGO was a couple weeks ago. Um, No, but FAFO, I had not heard of that. And I mentioned it to other people because this article appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And I thought, why would the Wall Street Journal be talking about this? And it's FAFO. And I said, I'd never heard of FAFO.
Mm.
Um, and I asked other people, oh, yeah, I've heard, that means stuff that we can't say here on prime time.
Yeah,
Um, but FAFO turns out that it's the most recent reaction to gentle parenting.
right.
Okay. Different people are talking about it. And the idea is that we've created Gen Z, and Gen Z has these characteristics, and the I don't know a lot about Gen Z except that they're criticized a lot.
Right.
Um, because they're the ones who they're portrayed as being weak and selfish and self-centered and all that. And they're the product, Gen Z is the product of gentle parenting.
Right.
that they never learned consequences. They never learned that they're responsible for certain things. And so they're very weak and they're very selfish. And so FAFO is sort of a, a way to prevent another generation like Gen Z.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so,
and it's this reaction that, like we often see with reactions where you go from one end and then you start swinging to the other end.
mhm,
And so you have this idea of parenting styles based on the idea of FAO, which is,
right,
just kind of seeing what happens.
right.
Do something and let's find out
Go
what.
ahead, see what, right. But the other thing I like about this approach is that it's based on consequences.
Right.
And that's something that you and I have talked about many, many times. It's in our book about the role that consequences play and how consequences should be used. And the idea here is that the child knows the rules,
Hmm.
and then if the rules are broken, then there's going to be some kind of consequence. So it's
Right.
these, this is what we have, these are the rules. This is what's going to happen if you break the rules.
And most importantly, it's, the parents will give warnings. Parents will ask the kid to comply and do what they're supposed to do. But if the rules are broken, mom and dad aren't going to fix it for them.
Right,
They're not going
right,
to, there are going to be consequences, and you're going to have to deal with the
right,
consequences.
right,
And obviously there's some aspects of this that we're going to talk about, but you and I have talked many times about the idea that's the way that it should be.
right,
Kids should have to experience the consequences of their behavior, um,
right,
which is not the same thing as punishment.
right.
If we were talking about the cupcake thing just a minute ago,
Mhm.
if something like that happens, the consequence is you have to clean up the mess you made.
Right,
That's not a
right,
punishment. It's just that this is the natural consequences, the natural event of things that happen next.
right,
Um, and so I like that aspect of this.
right. The two issues with FAFO are rules and consequences.
Right,
Okay, those are the two foundations. But we want to tell you the rules. Okay, first of all, do the kids know the rules? Are they clear?
right,
And this is very important, does the child accept the rule as being reasonable? Because if you have a rule that that child doesn't think is reasonable,
right.
they're not going to do it. Okay.
Especially as they get older.
That's right. If they think it's stupid, if they really don't accept the rule, you're going to be constantly butting heads and you're going to constantly be punishing the child. Make sure that the child, it's like, well, you have to be home by 1 o'clock.
Right.
That's reason, and because okay, that's reasonable. But if you
Mhm.
tell a 15-year-old you have to be home by 9 and all their friends are staying out until 10,
Yeah.
that's going to be a problem because the child is not going to accept the rule as being reasonable.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so there's a balance there between what you think is reasonable and what the child thinks is reasonable. As long as the child says, yeah, that's fair, they're going to probably do it.
Right.
If they don't do it, they're going to say, yeah, I knew the rule, I accepted it, I broke it, so now I deserve the consequence.
Right.
Okay.
Hopefully.
That makes all this much easier. If you
Right.
begin with reasonable rules um, that are age appropriate, that make sense to the child, most kids are going to obey those things.
And from that perspective, one of the things that we often encourage is for you to develop the rules with the kids. You
That's right.
Um, you know, so, when it comes to like curfews, you could say, all right, so, if you go out with your friends, what do you think is a reasonable time to be home? Now, they may
That's right.
say 2 a.m. and say, okay, that's not reasonable.
Right.
Um, because, for many reasons.
Right.
But they may say, okay, well, it's reasonable to say I got to be home at 10 o'clock or
Right.
11 o'clock. Okay, so what should happen if you're late?
Mhm.
Um, and build those rules and the consequences of those rules. We'll talk about
Right.
consequences in a moment, but build those with the kid. So as you said, it's like really their argument against the rules are going to be pretty limited because they helped come up with the rules.
Right. Ross Greene calls that collaborative problem solving. And
Right,
I think that's the way to approach this is that you negotiate this stuff with your children, you have agreement, and it's much easier to apply the consequence if you agree on the rules.
right,
So make sure that the rules, spend some time thinking about your rules and make sure that you and the child work on this together. If they agree on the rule, you're going to have far less trouble with the consequences.
right,
Okay. But if you apply a punitive consequence to a rule that they think is stupid and that nobody else has to live by, that's going to be a conflict that's easy enough to avoid.
right,
Consequences are it's normal. You don't want to bring your raincoat. It rains in Florida. You don't want to bring your raincoat to school. It doesn't matter. You're going to walk home in the rain.
right.
That's up to you. It's yours.
Right. Yeah, I'm reading through a book called is actually here right here on my desk called Raising Mentally Strong Kids. It's by Daniel Amen and Charles Fay.
Mhm.
And he talks about that. Dr. Amen talks about that in the book where he remembers his daughter. I think it was his daughter would call home like during the day and say, "I forgot to bring my paper." This assignment that was I had to turn in. Can you bring it for me? He said, sorry, no, I can't do that.
Mhm.
Um, because the point is, and I think it's a very well taken point, is that if you accommodate for every mistake that they make or
Right. Mhm.
every place where they fall short, you're not teaching them what the consequences are for that. And so
Right.
if you just run it up there, the next time there's an assignment that they left at home, there's no stress about that. There's no need for them to be concerned about it because, well, if I forget it, my parents will bring it for me. It's fine.
No, and I love the examples that she gives. She's one of them is, oh, you didn't feel like having lasagna for dinner? Survive until breakfast. You
Yeah.
know, I have parents who are making several meals every night to
Right.
accommodate their
Yeah.
No, this is dinner, and your next meal is breakfast. So it's not like you're going to skip dinner and snack all night. Okay. If you skip dinner, survive until breakfast. And then she goes on to say, left your toy on the floor again? Go find it in the trash under the lasagna that you didn't eat last night,
Yeah.
these are the natural consequences
Right.
that teach children the responsibility that they have.
Right.
And these are consequences that teach kids something. They're not punitive. You haven't hurt the child,
Right.
but these are very instructive consequences
And I think that's why, again, it's important to outline this stuff with the kid ahead of time.
ahead
So
of
if you
time.
say, all right, if you leave your toys out on the floor, that's a problem because somebody can step on them, somebody can get hurt. There's any number of
Do you ever step on a Lego block in the
It's
middle of the
terrible.
night?
It's terrible.
Bare feet, right?
Torturous. Um, so if you do that, I'm not here to clean that up for you.
Hmm.
If you do that, then I'm going to see that as it's something that you don't want anymore, and so I'm going to throw it away.
Right,
And so
right.
if you want it, then you're going to have to get it back out of the trash.
Yeah, it's there. I haven't burned it. I haven't destroyed it.
Right.
If it's important to you, go get it. You'll find it under the lasagna. You find it under the dinner you didn't eat last night.
So
So,
there are consequences that teach the
right,
kid that whenever you do something, there is a natural reaction to that, a natural consequence to that you're going to have to then deal with.
right. Yeah, because what FAFO gets right, and what I really like about these kind of approaches to parenting, is that it really does prepare children for the real world, because the real world is going to have consequences. If you don't turn in an assignment, you're going to get a zero. That's a reasonable consequence. Okay, you're not going to get credit, even partial credit, for something you didn't do. Okay. So you have to prepare children for the real world, and the real world has consequences. And so it is your responsibility to raise not only a straight A student, not only a successful student, not only a great athlete, but you have to raise a person who respects others, who keeps his word, who
Yeah.
accepts blame. I mean, it's the parents' responsibility to raise children who can accept blame when they make a mistake. And
Yeah.
we raise children who they refuse to accept responsibility for anything
Right.
because somebody else is shouldering the responsibility.
Right.
And what FAFO parenting does is it puts the responsibility back on the child.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Because you can easily see, kind of going back to the cupcake incident.
Mhm.
Um, if somebody says, "Why did you do that?" Well, she made me mad,
Right.
or she wouldn't let me have another cupcake, and so
Right.
that made me mad. It's not fair. Okay.
Hmm.
Well, some of that is true, but some of that is you have to deal with this. Those are your feelings, your emotions. You have to deal with that. Just because somebody put some limits on what you can do doesn't mean anything. But
Yeah. Yeah. She
so
made me mad.
that's
Okay. Well, you
right.
still can't bite her, you know.
Lots of things that make me mad.
Right.
Um,
So what
Whereas there's things that FAFO gets right, there's some things that, that obviously there's some concerns about because there's not one system, one style that works for everybody. Uh,
right.
and so it's not necessarily the answer for everyone.
That's right. It's just a trend. This is the latest trend in parenting. It's what you said earlier. The pendulum swings back and remember we did that podcast on Tiger Mom,
Right.
right?
Oh,
That was a swing to the far extreme.
yeah.
Okay. And then it came back to gentle. So we went from Tiger Mom to gentle parenting. Now we're coming back to FAFO. But remember, this is not the answer. In parenting, there is no this is the answer. This is the latest trend, and trends tend to be cyclical.
Right.
Um, but it also focuses on consequences, but the consequences have to be fairly constructed, uh, thoughtfully constructed, so that they teach children lessons and not just that I can hurt you, I can take your phone, I can punish you and inflict pain, and then maybe you'll do what I want.
Right.
That's what consequences are meant to do.
Right.
This
And
is,
it's and in that vein, you have to be careful that FAFO doesn't just turn into authoritative parenting.
that's right. Authoritarian
Authoritarian
parent.
parenting.
Right.
It's not, if people aren't careful, it can just get into, well, because I said so, and then you got to deal with the consequences, and it's not really teaching at that point.
Right.
It's just
Right.
I'm the parent, I make the rules, I say what happens, and you don't have any say.
Yeah, you can try that, but I think it's going to backfire on you.
Right.
You
Right.
know, if you stand as the authority, if you're the authority, if you're the dictator, you're going to get some pushback that's going to be very difficult to manage. And
Right.
I don't think you want to take it there. Okay.
Right.
So but FAFO, in a sense, is another form of authoritative
Right.
parenting, which we've taught for years and years and years.
Right.
So it's really not new, but it's a nice way to encapsulate
Right.
the principles of authoritative parenting. And it certainly isn't a political movement. This isn't, oh, we're going to get tough on crime. We're going to get tough on this. We're going to get tough on. No, it's not political. It's another form of authoritative parenting, which
Yeah.
is what we should have been doing all along.
Right. Yeah. So this is just a new approach, and it's not going to work with everyone.
Right. Mhm.
But the point is that we want parents to recognize that there's not one approach, as you just said. There's not one approach that works for everyone. You have to know your kid, and you have
Right.
to know get a sense of what's going to work for them, what's best for your child. Some
Right.
kids need a little bit more explanation.
Hmm.
And with just a little bit more explanation, they accept whatever it is that you tell them. Other kids, you just have to stop talking.
Right.
I mentioned this to a couple parents earlier this week. I said, you just talk too much. You're explaining too much because 5 seconds into your lecture, they're turning you off and they're not listening anymore. And so it's making you insane because you feel like I'm saying these things repeatedly every day,
Right.
and it's not changing anything. Well, they're not even listening to you.
Yeah.
So,
If you find yourself saying, I've told you this 1,000 times, that should send a light bulb in your head to, okay, this isn't working.
right,
Right.
right. So you got to get to know your kid. You have to understand them. You have to know what's going to be best for them, which means that there's going to be some trial and error. There's going to
Right.
be some trying different things, different styles, and see what
Mhm.
works best. You can't be so rigid that you can't adapt.
Right.
Mm, because it's just not there's just not a one size fits all.
Yeah, so there are several key points that we'll leave you with. There is no best parenting technique.
Right.
You need to decide what is best for this child,
Mhm.
knowing that children are different.
Right.
Okay. Even within a family, you have different personalities, different temperaments.
Right.
And so you have to match your parenting style to the child you're managing. Um, and to do that, you have to tune out all the noise. And by noise, we mean cell phones and TVs and tablets and iPads. And you have to get to know your child. We did a podcast a couple weeks ago about that you got to tune into your child. You have to watch your children. You have to observe your children to get to know them. You can't be on your phone and watching TV and, doing 10 things when you have to be raising this child, getting to know this child. Okay. Here's another issue that I want you to think about. The problem with how to parent, regardless of who's writing it, regardless of what the method is that it's always, when you talk about how to parent, you're talking about a top-down
Right.
system. You're talking about this is what you do to the child to get the result that you want.
Hmm.
In teaching, and you and I have spent a lot of years teaching,
Right.
it doesn't matter how good my lesson plan is. It doesn't matter how brilliant my lecture is. All that matters is the student learning. It doesn't matter whether I have a finger activated smartboard or if I have a chalk and a blackboard.
Right.
If the students learn, that's all that matters.
Absolutely.
Okay. It doesn't matter how clever, it doesn't matter what approach. It matters if they're learning. And I can have the coolest lesson plan in the world. I can have the greatest technology in the world. But if the students aren't learning the material, it doesn't matter what I do. It's the same with parenting. It doesn't matter how clever, how cute, how current it is. If your child is not developing in all these ways, then then you're not an effective parent. So think about it from what effect is it having on the child?
Yeah.
Um, as you said, different kids have different needs. Some need more, some need less. One of my children needed very, very little. She just accepted it, and I didn't need to spend much time. She did what she was asked to do without a lot of prodding and consequences, and that made my parenting very easy.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that it's important that kids to note that kids can't be afraid of the consequences.
Exactly.
As we were talking about a
Right.
minute ago, working with the kid to come up with what the consequences should be. But if your kid is out, your teenager is out and makes some poor decisions and they drink alcohol or they do something that might impair them, you want them to feel like they can call you,
Right.
be safe and not be afraid of the consequences because I promise you if your kid makes some bad decisions and maybe has some drinks at a party or something and they
Mhm.
become impaired, if they're scared of how you're going to react, they're not going to call you to make a good decision about how to get home.
That's right. Every parent says, well, if there's drinking, if you drink too much, just call me, I'll come and get you. But if they're afraid of the consequences, you're
Right.
not going to get that call.
Right. And
That's
so and so you know, and it's different if, because obviously this is part of the conversation. It's different. It's one thing if it happens once and it's like, okay, how do let's make sure that this doesn't happen again. But if it starts happening every weekend, okay, now we have a problem.
right.
But that's not a problem that you deal with punishment. It's a problem that you deal with by teaching responsibility and teaching some other things. And so again, it's just you have to adapt and adjust some of those parenting approaches to fit what's going on with your kid.
Right. Right. And this article ends with a child psychologist. So we make mistakes too.
Mhm.
There's a story about this child psychologist who um, was angry because her 8-year-old son kept having accidents at night, and the problem was he was having these accidents at age 8, and then he would lie about it to
Right.
his mother. And so she told the boy that she was going to take his allowance. So she had set up this system. She was going to take his allowance and buy new underpants,
Hmm.
clean underpants. Well, she later discovered that he had a medical problem.
Yeah.
And when the medical problem was resolved, he stopped, the accident stopped. But instead of saying, "Oh, I made a mistake," it was that no, she didn't give him his money back because he had lied to cover it up. So he had still made a mistake. And so she, no, there was still had to be there was a consequence for that. So even when we make, even in this case where it was a medical problem, there was still a transgression,
Right.
not a mortal sin, but a transgression that she felt she needed to have a consequence. And because he had lied to cover it up, she still kept the consequence in place. Okay.
Right.
And so, so our 2 cents, we
Yeah.
like to begin, we like to end with our 2 cents.
Yeah.
You have to be a thoughtful parent and you have to be careful,
Right.
but you have to work out the rules and consequences with your child ahead of time.
Yeah. And you have to know what you
What
want.
do you want? That's right.
That example with the child psychologist that you were just talking about, um, you know, I think that's a great example of there's still a consequence, even though there was the medical issue. But
Right.
you also got to be careful, like, okay, so what is it that you want? Were you, at the beginning, were you punishing him for wedding or were you punishing him for lying?
That's right.
So my concern with that is, depending on the situation, the specifics of the situation is, did you at first tell him, okay, you need to take your allowance and buy the underpants because you keep having these accidents and you're not taking responsibility to
Mhm.
go to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom, or are you giving the consequence because you lie about it?
Right.
You can't change it later.
Hmm.
It's like, so you have to figure out what you want. Do you want your kids to communicate with you openly and honestly and directly and tell you some of these things? Or do you just want them to, if there's a problem, just to fix the problem on their own, and whether they communicate that to you or not, you have to have those discussions and figure out, what is it that you're wanting as the parent of these kids? What do you want them to accomplish and do, in life in
That's
general?
right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, which thing are you applying the consequence
You
to?
can't change the goalpost. You can't change the
Right.
what you're looking at.
Right. So
So,
I think if you approach this, whether it's FAFO or authoritative parenting, no matter gentle parent, whatever approach you use, um, you have to know what you want. What are you trying to create? What are you trying to instill in your child?
right.
If you just want your child to be successful, that's all you want. You just want your child to get straight A's. That's going to lead you into one kind of parenting.
Right.
But if you want a child who is responsible, who accepts his part of the blame, who cleans up his own messes, who feels some responsibility for what's going on, then that's going to require a different type of parenting
Right.
based on rules and consequences. But
Right.
you have to be thoughtful and careful about the rules as well as the consequences.
And I think that the part of that related to, knowing your kid is that you have to make sure that those goals are achievable because,
That's right.
um, you know, I can't tell you how many parents come in and say, "Oh, he's capable of straight A's."
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, first off, I have issues with everybody making straight A's, but we'll put that aside. But you, you know, some kids are not capable of making straight A's. Even if they've made straight A's before, they may
Mhm,
not be capable of making straight A's. But if that's your expectation,
mhm.
what are you doing to ensure that's going to happen? Because now that's going to cause a problem.
Right.
Are you punishing them into submission until they do whatever they have to do to try to make an A? Or are you manipulating the system by doing the work for them so that make sure that oh, well, he did it. I just kind of cleaned it up for him and I just made sure that everything was okay. How is that manifesting? And so we have to be careful that the goals that we're setting, what we're wanting to achieve as parents, is really achievable because a lot of times we have ideas about things that aren't really realistic.
That's right. Yeah. So are the rules reasonable? Are they age appropriate? Are they accepted? Have you worked them out with? If the child agrees with the rules, they're more likely to abide by them, and they're much more likely to accept consequences for breaking a rule that they agreed to.
Right.
I think that's the important lesson here.
Absolutely.
If they're with you, if you're doing this together, I think you're going to start to find the success that you're looking for.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, that is it for today. We will be back next time to talk about some other concerns. Next podcast is going to be about some AI related concerns,
Yeah, stay tuned for that one. Mhm.
recent incidents. So, all right. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.